remains then to say hello, good morning, and we are now about to embark on my last contribution to your study of intonation, which is having a look at the functions of intonation in English. We have the usual diet of things to look at, perhaps not quite so onerous as previous occasions. Why not so onerous? Well, because a lot of what we're going to look at today, you will find you have a sense of déjà vu, because we have studied the structure in some detail, and looking at the functions will necessarily involve recovering some of that ground. So you'll be looking even at one or two of the same examples again. And we need to start with the 3 T's. Now I wonder what they are. This is a question of how well you've taken in the terminology, I think. Some of you will immediately know the answer to this. The 3 T's are tonality, tonicity, and tone. And these are all things that I've discussed with you. Tonality, in case you've forgotten that term, it's a rather strange term, it's a bit opaque, it's not very easy to understand. Tonality concerns the chunking or dividing of speech into its intonational phrases, its IPs. It's where we put the boundaries in. Tonicity is locating the nucleus, and tone, selecting the nuclear tone. So there we are, the 3 T's. And the 3 T's turn up again in John Wells's book. He actually refers to them in exactly this way. I like to think he got it from me, but I'm not sure if he acknowledges that. Cheeky. Okay, so those are the 3 T's. And what they do is they combine, they function either independently or together in carrying out different functions that intonation fulfills in an intonation language like English. The next thing then is to think about what the functions actually are. And this is a very difficult thing to do, really. It's a question of where do we draw the boundaries, how far do we go into sort of the whole issue of spoken discourse analysis, and how much of what we're looking at is phonetic or phonological. So strictly on our side of the fence, on the phonetic side of the fence. Again, there are 3 main functions. There's what can be described as the focusing function, and then the grammatical function, and finally the attitudinal function. The focusing function is the way in which we use intonation to direct your attention, to make you concentrate on what's being said. So it's directing the listener's attention to the salient points, the important points of a message. And of the 3 T's, it's particularly tonicity that's going to be important here, because tonicity, as you know now, is one of the most important accents in an intonational phrase. The grammatical function, this helps us to distinguish different grammatical structures and constituents, is another role that intonation plays, and here tonality is going to be important, but also tone. So 2 of the 3 T's operating together to help you along in analysing the grammar of an utterance. And finally, the attitudinal function. The attitudinal function is really, when you're listening to me, what you can tell about me, about how I'm feeling, about what I'm talking about, or how I'm feeling in myself. I'm communicating an attitude about the topic, or even about you, about the listener. Do I like talking to you? Do I think you're a nice person? Do I really not want to talk to you at all? Am I trying to give you the brush off? All of that comes across in the tone that I use, because I think tone is actually the very central part of the attitudinal function. You probably know that expression, don't take that tone of voice with me. what that means is, although people might not be able to explain it to you, they don't like your intonation. So you've actually given offence by the way in which your voice has gone up and down. So tone then has several edges to it. So the 3 T's and the 3 main functions. What we want to do next is to get onto the functions in detail, and I propose doing this in a sort of particular order. First of all, we'll think a little bit about how important the functions are. I think most people would agree that the attitudinal function is probably the most important function. We really don't have any other way when we're talking of communicating quite so efficiently how we feel, or what we want you to think we are feeling. So using intonation to communicate our attitudes is not only efficient, it's also very effective. People are very sensitive to it, as we'll see. The focusing function is probably the next most important. Now, obviously, you can focus people's attention by turning words around and repeating yourself. But again, intonation has the edge. Intonation is a very economical way of focusing attention. And then finally, the grammatical function. This is the one which some people say is virtually redundant, that there are so many other signals and cues in the structure of what we're saying and in the context, because I hope I've stressed each time that context is very, very important when you're looking at intonation. So many other signals and cues that we can really do away with the intonation altogether. We could do it on a monotone and you would still understand. Now, I'm not convinced of that, but there is quite a strong lobby out there that says the grammatical function is not very important. So we'll put that at the end of our list. So we have attitudinal, focusing, and grammatical. And I'm going to start with the least important first. So I'm going to begin by dispatching the grammatical function of intonation. Now, one of the most accessible examples, I think, one of the ones that we understand most readily about the grammatical contribution that's made by intonation in speech is the way in which we distinguish questions from statements. Statements typically have a falling tone, but questions tend to have a rising one. So if I said, using this noun phrase, an adjective and a noun, you shoes, that's a question, and you'd say, oh no, they're just old ones that I've cleaned up, or yes, I got them in a sale yesterday evening. So you would answer it as if it was a question. You would respond to that. You would intuit question from that intonation. Especially if you were a native speaker of English, you would intuit it that way. So we understand rising tones as questions. Another one. These are ready. These are ready. That means, are these ready? Can I take them? I might have said that to Molly if she'd been copying my handouts this morning. I might have gone in, seen the piles, said, these are ready. And Molly might have said, no, no, I'm just adjusting the copier, that's only half of it. Or, yes, and given them to me. It's a question. So rising tones typically identify questions, especially when there is nothing in the grammar to help us. So in the first one here, we've got the noun phrase only, and in the second one, a little subject verb, adverbial on the end there. Okay? Bless you. Right. Tonicity also interacts with grammar. That was tone. This is tonicity. And you have examples on your handout, starting with example 1, where you can see that word class membership is helped along by the location of the nucleus. Now, I've transcribed these examples. You've got a phonemic transcription of the nouns and the verbs, and you will see that the segments are identical. So in groups 1 and 2, we have nothing except the location of the nucleus, except the location of that stress, to tell us whether it's import, which is a noun, and import, which is a verb. So I have an import, but to import. A discount, to discount. Take off, but to take off. Now, a take-off is where you imitate something, ridicule it perhaps, skits, you know. But to take off is what aircraft do. A dropout, somebody who's turned his back on the regular structure of society, a dropout. But to drop out is something falling out of something. Maybe a dropout drops out, but we can tell the difference by the location of that stress. Sometimes, as in the third group here, the stress is not alone. It's helped along by changes in vowel quality. And you can see here that the strong in permit and the strong in subject are switching places when they lose the stress with schwa, permit, subject. Okay, so there's vowel alternations helping us along there. So there is some other cue in the signal. So that's word class membership in example 1. Tonicity also contributes to distinguish other grammatical constituents, and I've got some examples here which are similar pairs, again segmentally identical, but the difference between a simple noun and a noun phrase. A greenhouse, a place for growing tomatoes, for example, as opposed to a greenhouse, a house that is painted green. So a greenhouse is a noun, and a greenhouse is a noun phrase. And all of these operate that way. The second example is a little arcane. It's a tall boy. It's a sort of piece of furniture. It's like a chest of drawers. Think of a tall stack of drawers. People used to call them tall boys. But a tall boy is a male youngster of considerable height. Okay? A blackbird, a particular type of bird that I would recognise in my garden. But there are lots of other blackbirds that I need to distinguish that particular type from, because a blackbird is just any old bird that happens to have black feathers. That's the noun phrase. A heavyweight, as opposed to a heavy weight. And a big head, as opposed to a big head. Now, a big head, this is very useful vocabulary for anybody who doesn't know this. A big head is somebody who's really rather too important for their own good. They've got an inflated sort of sense of their own importance. A big head, okay? But a big head is just somebody who takes a larger hat size, and that's quite innocuous, all right? You can't, hold people accountable for the circumference of their heads, can we? But big head is a particular sort of attitude, and often it's not very nice. So, again, as I said, the segments in those sequences are exactly the same, but the nucleus moves and allows us to tell them apart. Tonality. We saw the 3 T's. Now, tonality also contributes in terms of grammar. We've seen tone and tonicity doing different jobs for us, but tonality can do this as well. And you've already seen this happening to a limited extent when we looked at vocatives and apositives. And if you remember, the vocative constructions had just one IP. The apositives had 2. That's one way of doing it anyway. Vocatives. Have you met the new student, Lubinka? Can you help me, Alex? I'm talking to Lubinka and Alex. But have you met the new student, Lubinka? The new student is called Lubinka. Can you help me, Alex? I'm called Alex. Those are apositives. Here's some more examples from your handout. The first one has a single IP. Give it to the lab technician, Golda. I am telling Velda to give it to the lab technician. But give it to the lab technician. Velda. The lab technician is called Velda. I don't want you to give it to the other one called Fred. I want you to give it specifically to Velda. Give it to the lab technician. Velda. That's an A positive. 2 groups. Have you met our new neighbour, Mr. Jones? I'm talking to Mr. Jones. Have you met our new neighbour, Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones is the new neighbour. Maybe I'm talking to the milkman. We just don't know. But an A positive again, where Mr. Jones and the neighbour have exactly the same status. They are one and the same person. So that, as I said, is ground that we've covered. So that should be familiar, and you should be beginning to feel a little bit comfortable with it. Need to remember, vocatives have 1 IP, A positives often have 2. A slightly grander idea is that tonality contributes to distinguishing different types of relative clause. Now, how much you understand at this point will also depend on how much you know about English grammar. But what we've got here are 2 versions of something that looks remarkably similar. My daughter who lives in Oxford is a solicitor. That was A. My daughter who lives in Oxford is a solicitor. That was B. Well, in A, we've got broad focus in that first group with the nucleus on the first syllable, the stressed syllable of Oxford. And what this means is that my daughter cannot be separated from Oxford. This is all part of what I want you to understand. So this one is the Oxford daughter, as opposed to, for example, my London daughter or my Paris daughter. What A is doing is identifying for you which one of my several daughters I'm talking about. I can't separate those 2 items. They are all there in focus. They are the subject. It's called a defining relative clause for that reason. In the second one, my daughter now stands alone. My daughter is a solicitor. I don't even need to say that second intonational phrase. My daughter is a solicitor. All that second phrase is doing is adding a bit of irrelevant detail. I could say, my daughter, who drives a tractor, is a solicitor. Or my daughter, who dyes her hair pink, is a solicitor. My daughter, who breeds African land snails, is a solicitor. And now you know quite a lot about my solicitor daughter. She also lives in Oxford. And I have only 1 daughter. So what that one is doing is identifying my 1 daughter and telling you things about her, which I'm sure she wouldn't mind me repeating. She does have a website with most of it on. That's called a non-defining relative clause. So we have intonation there, tonality in particular, helping us along. And of course what tonality does is it points different focuses, because every time you have an IP, you have a nucleus. And we already know that the nucleus is important. So that's a tricky little number, but it's definitely something where intonation is very active. Another common use is to distinguish different types of grammatical structures, adverbial structures. Here we've got, in example 8, the little girl danced amazingly, and the little girl danced amazingly. Well, in the second one, in B, it's an adverb of manner. It's the one that we perhaps understand most readily. She danced outstandingly well. She's a brilliant dancer. The little girl danced amazingly. We were stunned. But in the first one, we have what's called a sentence adverbial. And what that's doing is it's expressing some additional bit of information, maybe an afterthought. The little girl danced, amazingly. We were very surprised. We thought she was going to refuse. We thought she was going to sit there and say, I won't dance. But she did dance, and we were all surprised. And you can see there that there is this whole issue of how many intonational phrases we've got. And we can do that one with 2. And it means, as I say, additional surprise. We've got a fall in the first one and a rise in the second. Danced, amazingly. That takes us on to the focusing function. That gives you a kind of flavour of what happens with grammar. And now we want to look at what happens with focus. Now, focus is traditionally known as the accentual function. So you may well find that term in the literature if you read about this subject. Focusing function, the accentual function. This function hinges on the way accents are used to focus the listener's attention, of course. Example 9. Meet me by the clock in the station at 6. You can see there we've got 4 stresses. Now 2 of those stresses are also accents. So remember, accents either have pitch prominence. Meet comes at you out of the blue. I said meet, and it's much higher than my little prehead that I've just tagged in. And 6, which has moving pitch, high fall here, 6. So those 2 are accents, a nuclear accent and also one pre-nuclear accent. The message, the basic message that comes across here, what people will hear most easily, especially if it's a bit noisy, is meet 6. So if you were texting somebody and you didn't want to key in all the letters, you might just do what we used to do in telegrams. Those of us who are old enough to remember telegrams, you paid by the word, and so you kept the words to a minimum. And similarly, texting, if you don't want your thumb to drop off, there's lots of ways in which we abbreviate what we put into the text message. So, meet 6. Okay. But if I want to change that message in any way, I'm going to have to change the distribution of accents. I might want to add more information, and I might do that by adding in a stepping head, as I've done here. Meet me by the clock in the station at 6. Meet me by the clock in the station at 6. Do you remember that stepping head we saw going downstairs? That's doing it again here. What I've got now is 4 stresses, each of which is an accent. 3 pre-nuclear ones, each on a new, audibly different level, and the nucleus itself. The message now, therefore, is much more expensive. Meet clock station 6. Each of those accents is something I'm going to need to put in to my text or my telegram. Meet clock station 6. Meet me by the clock in the station at 6. I might, however, want to narrow the focus. Maybe all of that is too much. I might, for example, be answering this question, as in example 11. Okay, so we've been in the station by 6, but where precisely do you want to meet? The station's a big place. Meet me by the clock in the station at 6. Meet me by the clock in the station at 6. So I've got all of this out of focus stuff in my tail. Here's my last accent, the nucleus, and yeah, okay, default position, we've got it on meet as well. Meet clock will now be my message. Right. Now, that involved moving the nucleus about a bit, but it is possible that the nucleus stays in approximately the same place, but the word changes. And when that happens, we get what is referred to in the literature as contrastive focus or contrastive stress. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, if you have in front of you examples 12 to 15, I'll put them into a context for you, and you can see how this contrastiveness is working. here is an unimportant little thing. And end focus is usually unmarked form, so you might expect it to be completely unremarkable. But even end focus can produce contrastive stress if the context is appropriate. And here, of course, you have a context in which by changes into find. And so, yes, there is a contrast. The context is important to that message. I must find some. So I've now got narrower focus, I've fronted the nucleus, and that's the sort of thing you might expect in response to something like, don't worry if you can't find any, don't worry if you can't find any, but I must find some, but I must find some. I don't actually have that option, it's all very nice of you to say, but I must find it. And so the focus now is on must, which gives us a contrast between negative and positive polarity, really, between can't find and must find. In example 14, it's the narrowest focus I can possibly have. It's come right forward onto the pronoun at the beginning. I must find some. And that's the sort of thing that you might expect to hear if somebody says, why not her? Why not let her look for it? Why not let her look for it? I must find some. I must find. It's my responsibility, is the message there. Okay? And so, very exceptionally, not only have we put stresses on the pronouns, because you know English doesn't like to stress pronouns. It doesn't say, have you got a light for me, but have you got a light for me? If you want somebody to light up your cigarette, for example. We don't focus on the pronoun. We don't like focusing. We're very humble. We try to keep ourselves out of focus. But here, not only have we stressed on it, put stress on it, we've also focused on it to the extent that we've made it the nucleus. So it's very important here to get that contrast between I, me, the speaker, and her, somebody else that I might want to depute to do my job for me. I must find some. And of course the last possibility is the broadest focus of all, where we elevate some to a level of importance, and of course some means part of the total amount of all of it. And that's what you get if somebody said, don't expect to find all of it. And somebody might say, but I must find some. Or I must find some. Okay? And we have a contrast here between some and all. So that's what I mean by contrastive focus, contrastive stress. Now, native speakers are very well aware of the possibilities here. And they are, consciously or otherwise, highly skilled at exploiting this. They're very able to exploit it. And they can do it deliberately, as you can see in this advert which came through my door from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. If you care enough to feed birds, help us work to save them. And so we've got a contrast there between the two verbs, feed and save. You see things like this all the time. This is just one that happened to land on my doormat, very thoughtfully. Right, and that takes us on to the most interesting bit, but possibly the hardest thing to talk about. I think, in fact, intonation is saving us from the job of putting this into words. Your choice of nuclear tone is going to be the biggest contributor to telling the people listening to you something about your attitude, something about your feelings. The different tones, the 7 tones, 3 falling, 3 rising, and the mid-level, can convey all kinds of different attitudes on the part of the speaker. And again, the attitude that comes across will very, very often depend almost entirely on the context in which the tone is being used. But what it means is that I can come across as being nice, nasty. I can come across as being friendly or quite hostile, unapproachable. I can seem really interested, or I can seem totally bored. Got that? Totally bored. Wish I wasn't here. That's not true, and indeed it would be extremely impolite if it were. And that's another thing I can do. I can appear polite, or I can appear really quite rude. And you think, oh gosh, I can't listen to any more of that. Not very nice. So all of that is done by, amongst other things, your choice of nuclear tone. Sometimes it's just the nuclear tone, and sometimes, from all the things that we've been looking at, it's the total tune, the combination of the head and the tone together. Sometimes it's an interaction of all of this with the concept of key, which we also mentioned. Now, skilled speakers can vary tone at will. I can decide what sort of image I want to put across. Do I want to be friendly and approachable? Do I want to be a bit distant? Do I want to put somebody down and be a bit dismissive? Do I want to encourage them? All of that I can decide. And if I'm good at speaking, I will be able to manipulate you as a listener into believing whatever the message is that I've decided to put across. So you can use intonation with sincerity. I think it says that here, yes. Or you can be a bit of a con artist, a confidence trickster. You can use it to mask your feelings, to disguise your feelings. And when you do that, you're actually effectively deceiving the listener. So you might think, for example, that I love you all dearly, but really, whoa, not at all, none of it. Give me nightmares. That again isn't true, but that might be what I want you to understand. And we'll see how that works when we look at a few examples. Rising tones, first of all. The low rise can have a lot of different attitudes, which are going to depend partly on the context and partly, in the case of the low rise, on the total tune combination. If you have a stressful situation, using a low rise can sometimes defuse that. It can be very soothing, it can be reassuring. Things like, don't worry, I'm here, don't cry. It's probably not going to have a big impact on Julia here, but if you said that sort of thing to an older person, they would be immediately reassured. Don't worry, I'm here, don't cry. And for that reason, it's often used to soften the impact of WH questions. WH questions can be a bit abrupt, because remember, they typically have a falling tone. So something like, where does it hurt? Sorry I complained, but where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? Means I'm genuinely interested. And you think, oh phew, at last somebody's come to help me, thank goodness for that. Okay, so where does it hurt? What's your name? What's your name? If I can see you're really, really nervous, and I can't remember who you are, and I say, what's your name? You haven't a clue. You're so terrified, you can't even remember what you're called. But if I say, oh, hello, what's your name? Now, when I left home this morning, it was, and it comes back to you, and you can communicate. Mary Smith. Right. So, soothing, reassuring. However, again, depending on the context, it can be quite rude, grumpy, cross. Imagine something like this. Would you like some help? No. Sorry, I asked. But if you have, would you like some help? No. I'm leaving the door open. I'm saying, just at the moment I'm managing, but I'm really grateful. Perhaps I could ask you later. So that ... is what we often refer to there, meaning that it's, there's more to it. There's more to that message. And that's okay to answer that way with a rising tone, but it's certainly not okay to say no. That would really not win you any friends. Nor with this. This is what happens when parents have lost the plot. with, how many times do I have to tell you? Which you get the warning, you get the message that mum's cross, but at the same time, you haven't lost face. You can still retrieve the situation by then behaving yourself. But in B, it's obviously the end of the road. You're grounded for the next 6 weeks. How many times do I have to tell you? I've obviously told you 1,000,000 times before and you've taken no notice whatsoever. And my intonation says it all, and the average British teenager will pick up on that. High-rise too can have lots of different meanings. Can sound rather casual, insincere. Imagine this. Ooh, I've done all your ironing and put your clothes away. Yep. Hello? I've just spent the entire day, I've done all your ironing, I've put your clothes away. Maybe I've also tidied your room, and you say, yep. That's don't take that to, for goodness sakes. Thank you. Thank you. That's what we want. A really good thank you with a nice high fall. So now we're doing this little truncated thing with a high rise. You know, it's like I've done nothing for you at all. So I would be very cross. I would be extremely cross in the way in which this person had spoken to me. I would be affronted. I might do nothing else to help at all. But of course, being a mother, I would then do the same thing again, wouldn't I? But that's another story. So, careful with the rises, careful with the falls. The high rise is okay in other contexts. In other contexts, it will be completely unremarkable. Just sound like genuine, sort of lively chit-chat, you know, exchanging information. But use it in the wrong place, like on this kind of stereotypical, which is the sort of thing you might have, you know, you might say to somebody who's just doing something completely routinely for you. And basically then it's just a signal, yeah, okay, you know, received it, got it, seen it, whatever it is. But when you're expecting somebody to be grateful, a high rise is way off message. Full rise is particularly rich in attitudes. And one of the places where I said to you this tune is so important, you've really got to learn this tune. It's very, very important in communicating politeness. If you want to contradict people, correct people, disagree with them, or even persuade them. I told you about that mum, that sort of calling tune, didn't I? Mum, with a full rise, and that means I'm going to ask you a favour, so I'm trying to get you, soften you up, get you in a good mood, all right? Very important to master this. So if you have something like, the news is on at 9, it's not, it's at 10, this stupid thing. I mean, that's the message. It doesn't say that here, but that's the message. Somebody will think, all right, you're a bit touchy this evening. But if we have, the news is on at 9, it's not, it's at 10, it's years ago since it was on 9. Got the ... there. That feels kind of polite, that's all right. Nobody's lost face, you've just made a mistake about when the news is on. So that's polite. Please be home by 8. Why? My friends stay out till 10. Why? Because I say so. You're either back by 8 or you don't go at all. Please be home by 8. Why? My friends stay out till 10. Oh, really? Oh, well, look, just hang on. Don't go anywhere for a moment. I'll ring Marjorie's mum and see what she's doing this evening. And you've opened the gates to discussion there. The first one, you'll have an argument. The second one, you're being polite. So the full rise sounds much more polite. It's also used if you want to get out of a tricky situation. What do you think of my new hat then? that. That opinion is simply implied. It remains unspoken. It would be inferred by the speaker, and if they've got any sense at all, they won't pursue the point. They might feel a bit deflated, a bit wounded that you're not more enthusiastic about their new hat, but at least you found something positive to say. Colour's nice. Combined with key, you can have an even bigger range of attitudes. Everything from delighted surprise to disbelieving suspicion. I hear Patricia have triplets. That's a very surprised question, because I thought she was only having twins. Triplets? Wow! Tremendous! We must go and visit them immediately. Great excitement, a surprised exclamation. Triplets? You're exaggerating again. Is that true? So, yeah, very suspicious sort of question there. And it's all to do with key. You can see particularly I've got a high key mark by my high rise and my fall rise in A and B. I've lost my pointer. Is gone. No pointer. No, nothing's coming. So just look at A and B, see the upward pointing arrow. And in C, I've tried to make the low rise as low as I possibly can. The falling tones, too, have multiple interpretations. General sort of division is high falls, high spirits, low falls, low spirits. Shall we meet at 6 then? Yes, fine, I'll be there. So we're all looking forward to it. I want to meet you. Shall we meet at 6 then? Yes, fine, I'll be there. And I'm left thinking, oh gosh, I'm in for an evening. Why have I issued this invitation? This person does not want to come. This person does not want to meet me. So again, we put across a very different attitude on the part of the speaker. Well, we can also control that choice, if we're clever, control it deliberately, pretending to be enthusiastic when really we're disappointed. You've just opened an absolutely ghastly present, and you're quite off your guard here, and you say, oh, thanks, that's super, just what I wanted. The person's thinking, you know, I've just spent a whole week's wages on this. But if you can manage, oh, thanks, that's super, they believe you really like it, because that comes across as I am expressing positive feelings. And if you can raise the key a bit, oh, thanks, that's super. Wow, just what I wanted. Then you're home and dry. You have not given away your very negative feelings about this present. You have disguised them. And sometimes, as we know, socially, that is very important, but it's so hard to do. We had a further example of this, didn't we, when we looked at this one? Had this a few days ago. It's again in this handout, back at example 21. How do you find the new boss? Charming. He's great. How do you find the new boss? Charming. The word's the same. If the boss walks in and says, oh, sorry, what was that you were saying about? I was saying how charming you are, sir. So sorry. No, really embarrassed to be found flattering you in this way. But yeah, you're implying by lowering the key the exact opposite of what the word would say if you looked it up in the dictionary. So, you've seen that English speakers use nuclear tones and sometimes whole tunes to communicate how they feel to the people listening to them. And I think that apart from our facial expressions and our body language, which really does start to take us further into the depths of spoken discourse analysis, apart from those things, which are obviously going on at the same time, intonation is just about the only way we have of communicating how we're thinking or feeling in a particular situation. We don't say, hang on a minute, I'm about to be confrontational here, now listen up, and then embark upon something. It all comes out in our choice of tone, our timing, our choice of key. So we don't need any of this kind of glossing of an utterance before we deliver it. I'm really pleased to have this present. Thank you. You don't have to say, I'm really pleased to have this present. You can just say, thank you. And that says it all. Now, all of that is done largely subconsciously, and so the non-native speaking learner has quite a job. But intonation is an incredibly powerful linguistic tool. You can never underestimate the impact that it makes. Listeners in any language, English is not alone in this, are extremely sensitive to what they hear. And any speaker in any language has extreme difficulty in camouflaging their feelings. Think about when you're not feeling very well and how difficult it is to say, oh, I'm fine. And you've actually got a headache or a backache or a tummy ache or a leg ache or whatever. I'm really, I'm awful, you know? But you've got to say, oh, I'm fine, because that's appropriate. It's so hard to do. And that's overriding the automatic, the instinctive. And that's one of the jobs of intonation. Finally, it can sometimes be funny. You've laughed a few times this morning, which is nice, and to actually deliberately put humour in your way is probably a hostage to fortune. But the very infrequently heard fall-rise, so I should say rise-fall, oh goodness, ignore that. I quite like using chopsticks. Really? What do you find to do with them then? That's something that often makes people laugh. I think possibly I better demonstrate my skills by just, Michael's computer. I know we're slightly on time, thank you, Brian. It's the last but one slide, and I don't want to leave you with an error. Hang about. Oh, this doesn't work. Oh, dear me. Look, your whole past life flashing before you. Until finally, oh, it's still gone wrong. Let's go to this one. And go to that if you can get it to do it.